Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the In Confidence podcast. I'm back, Tom's back, and today we're going to be speaking about a topic that I'll let Tom introduce. But ahead of that, I'm going to ask Tom, how's your week been?
Yeah, all good, thank you, mate. Just again, sort of coming to the end of the season and like the planning stage for next season and all that sort of stuff for my actual job role. So yeah, just looking forward to cracking on with a few more episodes. What about yourself?
Yeah, a few little bits of work to tie up with some of the marks, some of the kind of external moderations bits, and then holidays to be taken. So bit of time away, bit of time in the garden, doing some DIY, more than just putting up a shelf, let's say. But yeah, it's going all right. So Tom, like I said, I'm going to pass back to you because I know you want to introduce this first little part for us.
Yeah, so if you've listened to some of the previous episodes, in episode 2 we spoke about sort of fitting in and the different ways a practitioner could do that and trying to fit into a new environment, or more specifically culture and an organization. And I think over the past couple of weeks, milling over that episode, it's led me to think about that potentially being the first maybe obvious step in sort of beginning cultural or organizational work within the environment that you're operating in. But once you've taken the time to build those relationships and begin fitting into that culture, what's your next steps? And I think that posed me with loads of different questions, which I thought would be good to bring up today. So if you take it as if I've asked you that question for now, what do you reckon the first steps would be once you've done the fitting in element?
So I think as soon as I hear culture beyond relationships, as we've mentioned there, Tom, I think values. I think that's the word, the phrase that immediately jumps to my mind. It seems to be kind of banged on about absolutely everywhere. Everywhere has values. You'll have documents that say it. Places will put it up in the walls. It'll be emblazoned across email footers, everything like that. There'll be kind of key behaviors that organization, that environment wants to live by. And I think as a sports psych, when we're speaking about culture, one, it's important that during the fitting in, during the relationship buildings, that you actually understand what that organization's current values, beliefs, kind of foundations, pillars, whatever they call it, actually are. And then obviously it's then the next steps of some of the culture shift, some of the cultures change better about understanding the environment, what the organization wants, but then also understanding what the terms actually mean. I think a lot of the time we can get kind of bogged down with, oh yeah, we've got 5 or 10, or I know the All Blacks had 14 different kind of pillars for success, kind of values for their organizations. Well, brilliant. They're really nice phrases or like a key word, but the important bit's what you actually do off the back of it. And I think that's kind of the foundation of the next step sessions that I end up doing, especially within kind of team sports, team environments, is having those conversations with staff, with athletes, with both, and some of the wider MDTs to go, right, what actually is it that we want to be seen as or hold ourselves against to, and what are the umbrella terms, but then actually what do they actually mean? And again, speaking with the athletes, going, if we've got this value of integrity, let's say, brilliant. Does everyone actually know what that means? And do we have an agreed definition of that? Can we work out examples that might demonstrate that we've shown that value or not shown it? So that again, all of a sudden we can actually hold ourselves and each other to be accountable for upholding these values, more than just, oh yeah, this is something that we do and we hold dear, but no one actually knows what it really means.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's a really long-winded answer to your original question, Tom. It'll be interesting to get your thoughts on it as well.
No, definitely. I think it's a really good place to start after the beginning has sort of begun, really,
Yeah.
in terms of doing that fitting in element of it. I think for me, there's something really similar along that values piece, and I think it's around like the values and the understanding of the area that you're operating in and how that area fits into the organization that you're going to be working with. And I think that might be, as you said, understanding their values and then your own personal ones and how you can align that to make sure that they fit really in terms of the organization. But I think an interesting point to bring up as well is what happens if they don't. So from your experiences going into or having experience of a range of different cultures where your values may not wholeheartedly align with those of the organization or the culture, what do you do then as a practitioner?
I think it is a brilliant question, Tom. I
It's a
think
difficult one, by the way. I'll put you on a little bit there.
it's all right. I normally do it to you, so it's fine. I think my response to that would be typically if I'm walking through the door of an organization to actually work there, kind of full-time, part-time, consultancy, whatever it is, the likelihood is that there's not going to be a huge difference in my values in the environment because I might have been able to pick up on that prior to walking through the door. Like if you go for a job interview, you're speaking to people and you're hearing their responses, you're obviously asking some questions that you get to as an interviewee as well. You can kind of get a sense for whether that environment would be receptive to you or whether you even fit. And then, like you said, you mentioned some of the culture, some of the values, but I think that weeds out kind of a complete contrast. Now, to flip it, to make it even more relevant, it might be that you're in an organization and all the staffing changes while you're there, and therefore then there is a friction that could happen. But I think initially, as we were saying, kind of going in and kind of the first relationships and then looking at culture, I think the likelihood is they're going to be not an exact match because you're never going to get a perfect fit, but they're going to be along the same lines because otherwise you probably would have avoided that job. Now you may have to take the job and kind of reflecting back on the question you asked, I think it would be understanding yourself as a practitioner. So I went to a DCEP conference in Liverpool. What was it? Just after COVID. So I think it was 2021. Everything starts blending together now. And Ian Mitchell was there kind of speaking on behalf of the England senior men's team as their performance psychologist. And he mentioned about having a charter. There were 6 areas on it, both as an individual, as a professional, as a psych. What do you want your values to be? What your beliefs, things like that. And I took that and was like, that's absolutely brilliant. So I've used that as my own charter across these 6 areas that were mentioned. And I think there are definitely parts of it that we spoke about flexing, that I'm willing to flex on and go, you know what, I'm happy to be in an environment if they don't quite fit my values exactly, if they are in this area. But also there are some that are kind of non-negotiables as well of going, no, it has to be that. So there has to be some value for sports psychology in there. I have to be able to take some lead/influence over where the sports psychology goes. And I also want to be able to position it in such a way that it isn't just a problem-solving service. They're probably my non-negotiables. There's a lot of things beyond that I would be able to flex on, but I think they're the key bits that I want to be able to operate as effectively as I can with flexibility in the role of a sports psych, and therefore float between different departments and things like that as and when necessary.
And I think that's a very good way to describe potentially what I didn't describe when I was saying it. So when I give a really brief answer before I chuck that question on you, I basically understanding your own values and then working out where they fit within that organization. I think you just described that in a much more detailed manner, basically.
Yeah, well, that's because you asked me the question. You see, I had to give some more detail. But yeah, I think that's the most crucial thing to do. And yeah, we do loads of reflection through our training, things like that. But I didn't really find myself as a practitioner going, right, what truly are my values on paper that I actually live by? And that are consistent. Brilliant doing a one-off reflection or a couple of reflections and saying that this is important, but actually sitting and going, what's me on a piece of paper as a person, as an individual, what recharges me, kind of looking at some of the self-care stuff. How do I know that I'm performing at my best? How do I know that I'm not? And what am I going to do? having that on a piece of paper is brilliant, because then I know as I step into different areas that's how I can almost like recenter myself or ground myself again to go, this is what I need to do. And it probably, again, we keep linking back to the original question you asked about kind of what happens if you're in an environment that doesn't align. I think going back to something like a charter or the reflection that you've had about who you are, and just going, right, this doesn't fit with me perfectly because of this and this. But now I understand that. I can understand why maybe it's a little bit more frustrating at work at the moment, because I'm not meeting these values, and therefore how can I go out maybe internally within the organization or go out externally and meet those needs that I have? I think that's the best way. Whereas if you've not put the forethought into it, you're probably sat there going, I'm in an environment, it doesn't align to who I am, what I want to do, but you don't know kind of the elements that are frustrating you.
I think you've explained that perfectly in my opinion, just in terms of the way you've laid it out. So if I was to flip it and go the complete opposite way now, so you've gone into a new environment, the cultural side of it, you've fitted in really well, you've realized actually your values are aligned to what the organization wants to produce and to deliver. What's your next step as a practitioner to deliver some form of cultural or organizational work within that? I think then we've covered both sides of the bargaining, haven't we?
I think sat here, and I'm not going to kind of squirm out of the question, but I think sat here, it's difficult to answer because as a practitioner, especially on the culture things, it's not just you as an individual that get to decide where it goes. You've got key stakeholders, gatekeepers, kind of key people within the organization that are going to help to navigate what that cultural work looks like beyond where I might see it going. I'm always going to get the buy-in and ask for the opinions of other people. So I guess kind of what a definitive next step looks like is probably impossible for me to answer without being really, really specific to one instance and one scenario.
If you want me to be really honest, Ryan, I was kind of hoping you were going to say that, like that I was kind of hoping that might be your answer, in terms of, because I know it's when you're going into these roles as an early career practitioner, especially, you think about the things. In my opinion, you think about things that you can affect, and I think being able to potentially think you can affect the culture of somewhere, to maybe add, it might be brilliant, but you think you can add elements to it that can kind of almost come to the forefront of your thinking. And actually, if something is progressing well, your values align with that, with the values of the environment and the organization you're working with, these things can take lots of time to change and don't necessarily need poking to begin with, when you might be an early career practitioner in the role, and that you describing that there's no definitive answer when you haven't got the context necessarily of the situation is probably a good answer for people who may be going into these sort of steps more recently. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's obviously nice you've kind of highlighted that within my answer, but I think it's really important that it's always seen as this key area within kind of sports psychology, the cultural work. But as we've both said, it takes time. Now, you want to be more productive kind of initially than something that's going to take months or years to actually have a sizable and noticeable impact on. So it's not necessarily to focus on quick wins, but you can definitely focus on some of the more immediately impactful areas. Such as some of the one-on-one work with coaches, working through the coaches, working one-on-one with players. There's a more noticeable impact quicker from the sports psychology perspective, but also kind of the reception perspective, perception of the support as well. You can do much more effective work in a shorter period than trying to tackle something like culture, especially if you're trying to do that in the first few months when the development of relationships isn't there as strong. So then it's harder to get people to buy into whatever you want to do from a cultural perspective if it's something different.
Yeah.
But also, how do you know where they need to navigate if you've not lived in the environment for long enough? And I think this is that textbook thing of going, oh, brilliant, there's a case study, there's a scenario that's been released by this club or this organization, they're doing this. The All Blacks is a perfect example. Yeah. I mentioned before, gone brilliant. They've got 14 kind of philosophies, kind of key pillars for success. What we'll do is we'll just copy theirs and we'll do that. And just gone, well, they're the gold standard. But what you don't realize is that the only reason it works is because it's inbuilt within their organization, within the culture, within the people that are there, within their kind of individual cultural norms together. It's built on so many layers that you can't just copy and paste the scenario. Probably the same as us working as practitioners with an athlete. Just because it worked for one athlete doesn't mean you can copy and paste that breathing technique and it's going to work for that area with someone else. And I think that's the risk of if you go into an organization and you try and do the cultural work straight away. Because you're going to be copy and pasting and it just isn't going to work. Or it's going to take longer.
Do you think as a practitioner, you're able to potentially move forward with some of the earlier elements that you can do, like working with the coaches, working with the players, working with the coaches or working with the players via the coaches, for example, and building things into a program and that sort of stuff? Do you think you can show cultural understanding by maybe having an appreciation of language that they might already use within that environment and bringing sort of those elements into your own personal practice that you might be working one-to-one with a coach or a player or an athlete of any sort or a sports science staff member, utilizing the culture, showing that you've got an understanding of it to other staff members or players by, for example, like I said, using their language or using a particular piece of using some form of practice that's been built into the culture previously and worked. I think doing that early work where it's not necessarily utilizing the culture but showing an appreciation of it might stand you in better stead moving forward when you want to then potentially look at working with the team to be able to affect the culture. Do you think that's
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were gonna add something else.
No, I was gonna, but I was looking for an answer.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think you need to have an appreciation of, and there needs to be some continuity as well. I think from if we're stepping into a role that someone's been in previously, you don't necessarily want to rip everything up that they've done on day one and start everything afresh, because then everything's going to change. Not only is it going to be a huge workload to do that, but everyone's going to be alienated from what you're doing for a period of time while everyone gets up to speed with it. A lot of the time, it's much simpler and you get better buy-in. If you continue some of the elements that you think as a practitioner are going to work and you can successfully deliver, and just make tweaks over time. And I think by doing that, it's kind of overlapping with what you're mentioning there about kind of appreciating the culture, appreciating that this is how you've perceived sports psychology previously, because this is how it's been delivered previously. And therefore, what I can do is, rather than doing a whole kind of full change on day one, I can actually tweak and align it to maybe where I see it a little bit different. But we can drip feed it in rather than it being a huge culture shock and going, didn't realize that this was sports psychology because I've changed it all in one day. And I just think that it depends on loads of other factors about time and things like that. But if you have the time and the ability to make a more drip feed change, that would be something I'd recommend. I think it enables you to see what was working previously, and you can keep some elements then, because guaranteed there'll be some really good elements that you don't want to throw out. But also it allows you to tweak some of the additional elements to make sure that how you see the role as a practitioner, as an individual, is as aligned as possible to how the organization wants it delivered as well. If it can't be perfect, at least you can kind of find a really good hybrid between the two for how it works. Whereas if you just shift it to everything you want to do as a practitioner, then what happens if you've created a whole bespoke program with multiple layers and complexity, and then find in the second week that it doesn't work because the organization hates this because it's not right for what their culture or how they perceive the role as being.
Yeah,
that's kind of my thoughts of you posing that as a question.
Yeah, again, I think you've doing on fire today, ain't you? You sum that one up very well again, to be fair. I think it's I'm trying to think if I had any other examples, but I can't. I don't think there's a better way to explain it than that currently.
I guess knowing some of your experience, but then not knowing some of it as well.
Yeah.
Going into the roles that you've gone into, was it that you had a complete blank slate and you could do what you want, or was it that there was some existing information that they'd already been presented in sports psychology? Did you keep it? Did you throw it out? Can you speak on that a little bit?
And the honest answer is varied. Sometimes there was previously, sometimes there wasn't. And I think, like you said, not trying to change the world in your first however many weeks you might be there is really important, especially so for example, it might be slightly easier to do if there's been no sports psychology work previously, because therefore you've got a blank slate and you're able to potentially stamp your ideas whilst again showing an appreciation of the culture that may already be there in loads of different areas, not particularly the psychological one. So that may be slightly easier. However, I completely agree with what you're saying about the drip feed element of when something has been there previously, because there would have been guaranteed to have been some good work that was in there and stuff that you could utilize. So being able to potentially show how you can show an appreciation of the work that has gone previously, whether that be to the coaches, the support staff, or the players, and then be able to sort of drip feed in your own ideas so that you can get buy-in from those that you need it from to be able to deliver effectively. That's probably the way that I would see it previously. And I know that is kind of pinching your answer a little bit, but that is the way that I would tend to go about it from my experiences. It is that appreciation of work that's gone beforehand, potentially a little bit of appreciation of this is what I'd like to do moving forwards, whilst not trying to go, this is what I'm going to do, and you're going to listen whilst I do it. It's a more of a what I'd like to do because this is what's gone before and it's worked really well in these areas. I think I could maybe support in these areas to expand it even further, potentially get these outcomes for these athletes, players, support staff, and coaching staff, for example. Yeah. And I think that's probably my way to sum it up.
Yeah, and I think a key bit that's just come to mind while you've been kind of providing that summary there, Tom, was pacing yourself. I know that's a phrase that I'm constantly thinking of when I was working as an applied practitioner, going, you don't have to use the phrase change the world. You have to change the world this year or this month or this week. Yeah. Actually, there can be some logic to spreading out some of the projects. I'm going, you know what, this is going to be really good, but to do it well and to get the uptake that I want, it's probably better to delay this over something else that I need to prioritize. I'm going, again, just because you've got tons and tons of ideas for how sports psychology can be run right now, doesn't mean they all have to be actioned within the next month. And I think that was something that I constantly kept coming back to, of going, oh, I've got this idea, I want to do this project. And actually going, if we implement too much this year, it's going to be overkill for staff, athletes, and myself to try and keep up with this stuff. So actually, which part of maybe 4 projects do I want to implement this year? And what can I do in maybe January or over the summer to spread it out so that, again, I can implement, look at it, get some feedback, work out what works, tweak more, rather than having 4 or 5 different things on the go and people are getting lost and confused by what is that I'm actually trying to implement.
Yeah, and I think that last little sentence is really important for me, is that making sure that your role, that can be an ambiguous role at points, and maybe I don't think is, but it can be viewed as an ambiguous role at points, is actually you're clear in what you're trying to do with an appreciation of all the cultural elements, so that you're not caught out potentially with potentially others viewing you as a role that's sort of like lost and confused because you're trying to affect too many things in potentially too much of a short space of time. I think that was an important point that I picked up on at the end there.
Yeah. And I think that's a really nice place for us to bring this one to a close, then finishing on kind of an important point of, again, pacing yourself and keeping sports psychology clear. Because if you don't understand it as a practitioner, then no one else has got any chance. So yeah, really appreciate people listening. I appreciate you obviously joining us again for a chat, Tom. Always good, always insightful. Yeah. And we'll be back again next Monday. Monday seems to be a good day to release these, so we'll keep doing that. And we hope everyone's enjoying the nice weather.
Yeah. Cheers, everyone. Thank you.